Hello again everyone, and welcome back to Victoria 3 Dev Diary 126, which is the Update 1.8 overview. My name is Derail, and today we're going to be going over all of the features included in this Dev Diary, some of which actually look pretty game-changing. Without any further ado, let's begin. Starting off, I briefly want to talk about the combination of Update 1.8 and 1.9. Originally, how it was going to work is that 1.8 was going to come out in the next few weeks, and it was going to be a smaller update focused on general polish and bug fixing. 1.9 was intended to come out afterwards, relatively closely on the heels of 1.8, but they decided that they didn't want to end up doing two updates being worked on at the same time, because that would have created major challenges for 1.8 post-release support, and other changes would have been more difficult, so they decided to combine the two together. So now we're getting one massive 1.8 update with the combined scope of both 1.8 and 1.9. This includes new features, bug fixing, general polish, and some major improvements to the game. Paradox also states here that all of the features shown are going to be very work in progress, so keep that in mind. Nothing that you see here is in its final state, and that especially is true for things like Ideological Forces, which are some of the new features coming along with 1.8. Ideological Forces, by the way, is the political movement rework. The TLDR here is that they plan to transform political movements from spontaneous and temporary demands for a single legal reform into longer-term ideological movements with a much broader agenda. Basically, what they felt like is that interest groups were a little bit opaque, they were reliant on using certain pieces of content like corn laws in a way that didn't really feel immersive or particularly rewarding. You didn't really feel like you were getting your laws in an interesting manner. You had to either go out of your way to kind of cheese the system and get the things that you wanted done, or you would have to rely on RNG, and that was a little bit frustrating. How it works now is a lot more interesting. You will have a long-term movement for a lot of different legal agendas, which will attract supporters from your pops and influence the politics of the interest groups that those pops are backing. Political movements will also include religious and cultural minority and majority movements, with some corresponding changes to civil war and secession mechanics, which I think sounds very interesting. And one of the major aims of this, by the way, is to make the mechanics around how they assign ideologies to interest group leaders a lot more transparent to the player. So scrolling down here, we can see the intelligentsia, and we can also see the leader ideology chances here. Abolitionist has an 86.95% chance of occurring. That is from the Abolitionist Fraternal Association. We also have moderate at 8.69% and Republican at 4.34%. This is really great in my opinion. You're going to be able to see exactly what will be happening next in your country, and you'll be able to prioritize certain laws or look at certain situations from that lens. I really like all the changes I can see here, and I would actually like it if something like this were able to be toggled. Maybe if you didn't want to play a game where you were able to see everything that could happen, that could theoretically make it a little bit more difficult, but I digress. Next up, we have everyone's favorite feature to talk about in Victoria 3, discrimination. Another issue straight off the future update plans that they were tackling in 1.8 is the way that pop discrimination works. They've stated since release that they want to change out the way it functions, and they're finally getting to that feature. Basically, the principal goals are as follows. They want to introduce multiple levels to discrimination instead of it just being a binary state of yes or no. They want to have the level of discrimination faced by a pop be determined by factors other than just what the law says. And they want to turn assimilation into a properly useful feature that isn't only available to fully accepted pops. I really like all three of those ideas. Before we take a look at the image here, do note that there isn't going to be a let them eat fish law, and some of the features are not necessarily planned, so keep that in mind, especially from this section. But the TLDR here is looking at Liberia. We can see the acceptance status of all the pops, and it ranges on a scale from 4 to 1. In reality, it will be from 5 to 1, but there are no tier 5 pops, which I imagine means that this nation has banned things like slavery, for example. Everyone can vote in elections from what it seems like, and basically you get buffs or debuffs to certain actions depending on what tier you're at. And I imagine the buffs get stronger and stronger as you approach tier 1, which I would also imagine is the best overall acceptance rate. And actually we can see what the cultural and religious acceptance looks like down here. We have things like Anglo-Canadian at 36%, and it is rising rapidly. We can also see things like Irish over here 4 times over, and it is decreasing. We can also see Protestant over here on the right side, so I imagine there is some overall correlation between the two. And you can also see the laws affecting acceptance, which is pretty neat. It seems like how this is going to work is that over time, as you build up proper laws that allow people to become accepted, acceptance will start ticking, and people will move up into the higher and higher tiers. I imagine there is some benefit for doing so, maybe in the form of GDP buff or things like that, because those pops will be able to use, more high-end jobs, and then once they're in those high-end jobs, they make more money and they add more to the economy, but we'll have to see how this shakes out. Last on our list, we have food availability, famines, and harvest incidents. Basically, they want to expand on the gameplay around agriculture and food availability, which was very much an issue at the time. For example, things like the Irish potato famine, the famines in British-controlled India, and also worldwide famines in the wake of the Krakatoa explosion. So they're going to be introducing the concept of food availability for pops, which is a factor that is separate from, but intrinsically linked to a pop's standard of living. Basically, they're thinking that food availability for a pop will be determined by how much of their buy package goes towards feeding themselves, how expensive the food goods they're purchasing are, and whether there is any shortages among those goods. Low food availability will increase pop mortality and radicalism, and may trigger a statewide famine if it's widespread enough. Also, they state here that food production was very much dependent on the weather and climate at the time, and many peasant families were only 1 or 2 bad harvests away from the brink of ruin. So to simulate this, they're also adding something called harvest incidents, which can increase or decrease agricultural output in different regions over a longer time frame. And here's what the map of that kind of looks like. You can see there's some positive events going on in the north of Russia as well as Korea, and some negative ones going around in East Africa as well as Indonesia. Do note that it's not supposed to be on the C zones, that's just a bug from the feature being work in progress, but things look pretty interesting. I would actually like to see this basically take up the whole map. I imagine how it should work is that pretty much everywhere should be affected by either a positive or a negative, and those positives and negatives should change over time. Maybe even within a year or two, things should change pretty significantly. If there's a huge cold front all over Europe, and all of a sudden they can't grow food anymore, that should be something that greatly affects the player's gameplay experience, and I'm very happy that they're adding something like this at all. Paradox wraps up here by saying those are the big ones for 1.8, but it's not all that they're planning to do in the update. There's also going to be some other changes and improvements that we can expect, and that they will explain in detail over the next few weeks. Notably, companies owning and investing in buildings, bulk nationalization, multi-select and right-click orders for formations, and adding war goals on behalf of subjects. Next time around, they're going to be going over the bulk nationalization, as well as the companies owning buildings, which Lena will tell us about next week. I've got to say, I think companies owning and investing in buildings is just as big as stuff like Harvest, but regardless, I am really excited about these changes, and it looks like we're getting a lot of major improvements to Victoria 3. Wrapping up with this dev diary, I've got to say things look like they're moving in an excellent direction. I like pretty much everything I have seen here, and nothing seems like it could be introduced in a way that would make it worse than the current systems. Stuff like discrimination needed major changes, and it seems like we're finally getting them in the form of Update 1.8, which will be coming out this year, which I am incredibly happy about. Thank you so much, Paradox, for releasing this dev diary, as it's given us a ton of information to look over, and I'll be back next week to talk about the features then. At the end of the day, though, my name's Derail. Thank you so much for watching this video till the end, and look to the future, fellas. I'll see you then.